George Carlin was this famous comedian, just ripped people apart, and his language was a little bit rich. So I wrote a little something down on what George Carlin might say about anti-nuclear people. So, and this isn't Mark Hinaman's opinion or Shawn Connors. This is what George Carlin probably would have thought if he had a choice. Anti-nuclear people are a snotty little sociopathic group of hyper-narcissistic, rich, pampered, Malthusian, putty-butt busybodies whose luxury, isolated lifestyle burn up Olympic-sized swimming pools full of fossil fuels while telling the poor little boys in sub-Saharan Africa and India to keep burning water buffalo dung to heat up your 200-calorie tin cup of dirty soup, where your mothers and sisters spend all day cleaning clothes and fetching rancid water. We should seal these snobs up in Yucca Mountain, kind of a soft caramel filling instead of the hard English toffee we were going to put in there. That would give American taxpayers more than their money's worth for building that $19 billion political hellhole. The only way we'd let them out is they agree to debate Mark Nelson for an hour in the public square. That'll teach them. Nelson's like pro-nuclear Zorro. He'll have their buttons zipped off and their bangs trimmed before he goes in for the kill. I say, let's turn off their valves and switches for a week and see how they like it. I just don't like people that don't like people. So that's what I think George Carlin would say about anti-nuclear people. Now, you and I would have never said that. George Carlin would have said that. So we wouldn't have said something like that. We're more positive. I tell everybody, the good guys are about to tell their story. This is the first time there's ever been a positive story in popular culture about nuclear energy. We got more heroes in nuclear energy than we did in our space program, you know.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America.
that is willing to
But we're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the
overhaul
job.
nuclear regulation
We need scientists to design new
and
fuels.
focus on net public
We need
benefit
engineers to invent new technologies. We
over absurd levels of radiation
need
protection,
entrepreneurs to sell those
then
technologies.
we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech,
we
zero-carbon
have
components.
unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
Welcome back to another episode of the Fire Division podcast. My name's Mark Hinaman, and for this episode, I was joined by guest Shawn Connors. So Shawn is a fiction author, but he really enjoys the topic of nuclear energy and what it can do for society and the planet. He thinks it can be a hero for the planet, so he's written a novel about it. And we talk about the novel during this episode. Unfortunately, during the episode, we bounced back and forth between the novel and the real world, and kind of seamlessly, and it wasn't always obvious when we went back and listened to it what we were talking about, the novel or the real world. So we thought it'd be helpful to have a little bit of an introduction, to just give the summary of the book, you know, something that you might see on the pamphlet on the first page, and then we'll dive into the episode. So again, Shawn Connors' book, Chain Reaction, subtitle, A Story About Power in the Age of Climate Change. Chain Reaction is a novel set in the near future in 2027. The book's protagonist is a 19-year-old science polymath by the name of Amy Austin, who takes on environmentalist and Academy Award-winning actor John Manning, the spokesperson for an anti-nuclear group called the Terrestrial Ecology Society. The two square off in a public debate over the fate of a nuclear plant in rural Michigan. But all is not as it seems. Amy is building a new nuclear reactor. The technology is 30 years ahead, small, light, safe, powerful, and affordable. The world energy market, already in disarray, is controlled by some of the most powerful people on Earth, who start making their moves ahead of the disruption they know Amy's reactor will cause. A chain reaction ripples around the globe. As an eco-terrorist cell moves against Amy, her loyal group of unlikely characters risks everything to protect and help her. There is no going back. Time is running out. It's now or never, and it was a breathtaking and dangerous race to save the planet from ourselves. So that's the little intro for the book. Hopefully it gives some context. Shawn and I really enjoyed this conversation and recording this interview, and we hope that you guys enjoy listening to it. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Fire Division Podcast. My name is Mark Hinaman, and I'm joined today. My guest is Shawn Connors. He's the author of Chain Reaction, a story about power in the age of climate change. Shawn, how you doing?
Good afternoon. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Awesome. Shawn, you and I met at a conference recently, and I'm excited to dive into kind of your background, why you enjoy nuclear, but you're actually a fiction writer. Is that
I'm a
correct?
fiction writer, and you caught me in a moment of moderation. I was eating chips and drinking beer, and you asked if I eat that regularly. So that was kind of funny. So
Yeah,
that
I
was
walked up and you were having
a weak
chips and beer
moment. You
for dinner.
caught me, and so I'm amazed you invited me on the podcast. So let me
Yeah.
start it as a reference point. I was born the year the Nautilus, the nuclear submarine Nautilus, was launched, and that's also the year that the Shipping Point nuclear power plant went online. Now I'm going to fast forward it, get past all the middle stuff. I'm kind of a cross between, say, Walter Mitty and Forrest Gump. I like to read a lot. I got a voracious appetite for reading, and I've got above average skills in critical thinking. And so that's where I've got at this point in my life. I guess if I was a dog and you were going to try and rescue me out of a kennel, I'd be sitting there and a couple would walk in, and I know it was my chance to be saved. I would look at them, and I would focus primarily on the woman, and I'd try to get her to look my way. I'd use all the dog sense I had my whole life and get her right on the edge of that magnet is and get her eyes looking at me, and bam, I got eye contact, and we have a connection. And I know I'm going to get that with that woman, but not with the guy. The guy's going to say, is he housebroken? Does he bite? She's going to look at me and say, he's so cute. But they're going to say, he's a little older. And she's going to say, well, he needed us. We could save him. And she's going to instinctively know that she had walked into that kennel that day just because she was going to meet me. Now, at this point, the man's thinking, well, he's not going to fight this. I mean, is he really going to say, forget it, we don't want this old dog, and he's going to walk out? But he's going to instinctively know that she's making the right decision because she has probably saved his bacon a number of times in his life or in their relationship. Now we fast forward a little bit. I look at the world and I think the world is in a position where it needs to be rescued. I'm fairly convinced it's women that are going to have to do it. They have the instinctual, I don't know, they just have the instinctual sense to do it. Most of them, many of them are mothers. They'll take care of their sons and daughters equally. And I think about all the women around the world that have not been able to reach their potential in history. So we think of all the great men in history, the scientists. It's always usually a man's name. And I think, what would happen if we could unleash all that talent in the world? And, you listen to Robert Bryce, and he says really what the women in the poor countries need is a wash machine. Now, why the men don't do the laundry, I don't know. But he says if you can free the women up from the laundry, if you can get them a little bit of refrigeration, if you can get them a light at night, I think that starts the tipping point to making the world a lot better. And you say, well, so how do you get to that point? And to me, at least, I think nuclear energy is probably the best way. Maybe natural gas to nuclear energy, that kind of thing. I got into nuclear energy. I was always a little bit nervous about Palisades nuclear plant, which I'm sitting about 4 miles from right now. And I grew up in this area of southwest Michigan. And my business, now I'm going to go back from where I'm at, we'll go backwards on my resume. So my business was a publishing business. We did employee communications, And so we had to get complicated things so people could understand them. One day I'd be at a trucking company, say in Atlanta, long haul truckers. We had to teach them how to use their APAP machines at altitude so that they had cardiovascular issues. It's a very unhealthy population. We had to get in the cabs with them, figure out how to do this, figure out how to explain it, figure out what their problems are, put communication systems together for that. Then I'd fly across country and I'd be at Sandia Labs, and we'd be teaching them about their pension plans, those kind of things. There was a great human resource director at Sandia Labs named Peter. I wish I could remember his last name. And I told him, I said, the place was fascinating. And I think it was in the 90s. And he said, well, let's go have lunch. Maybe we can talk to some of the people. So we're having lunch, and I told those, I was teasing the guys mostly because they reminded me of a Far Side cartoon. So Gary Larson, and if you haven't seen Gary Larson's Far Side cartoons, look them up because they're a riot. So we had a great laugh, and a good relationship was developing. And then I told them I was a little bit nervous about Palisades, and they gave me some things to read and reassured me. And I think right about that time, Power to Save the World was probably being written, and
And
right
what's
there,
that? What's that?
it's a book. Power to Save the World, a book by Gwen. Help me with the last name, but highly recommend it. It's a woman journalist that went from being somewhat anti-nuclear to becoming pro-nuclear, and she used a physicist at Sandia Labs who was a friend of hers to take us on this journey. And so I read that book came out in about 2010, I think. But
It's
anyway, I just
2008,
started learning more and
looks
more
like.
about nuclear at that point. Kind of move from there.
Nice. Well,
So
let's step back just a little bit, Shawn. I want to just summarize or say back to you a little bit. I mean, you were an author, you had your own publishing business, and then you discovered nuclear power, it sounds like, in about 2008 when you were at Sandia National Labs, or you had a book that was recommended to you and you started digging
yep,
into it. Did I get
yep,
that right?
that's correct. So I was a publisher. A lot of what I did during that time was write sales and direct marketing copy, did some public speaking, but wrote a lot of sales copy, and also
Yeah,
participated in writing some of the copy for the communications, which simplified 401k plans and health plan benefits and things like that.
I see.
When I went to
So a lot
college,
of technical writing or simplifying writing for corporate publications, we'll say, but I mean, that stuff's not super exciting. Maybe I'm wrong in that. Maybe you made it very exciting and engaging to read.
well, we used humor a lot, and so we used
Gotta
cartoons.
use humor. Yeah.
Well, for example, so let's say they got a health issue and obesity's one of the issues, smoking's one of the issues. You can't just keep pounding people overhead over this stuff. So we would use a bear in the illustrations anytime we talked about obesity. We had a dragon woman that had given up smoking, and it was, boy, she's really hot since she quit smoking. We were doing things like that, and we would use funny quotations to underscore the point. So I love quotations, so that we kind of went that route too. So what happened is
Gotcha.
before I got into that publishing career in college, really went to college just to wrestle. I was on a wrestling team in high school and college. I wrestled a little bit internationally, and I ended up at Indiana University, and my coach was an Olympic champion, and he was most valuable wrestler in the world that year. He pinned an Iranian 5-time world champion named Habibi. And so his name was Doug Bluebaugh, and he was a Neanderthal man. I think he was a genetic, he just seemed like he came right out of the genetic profile of a Neanderthal man. But his technique was outstanding. They're still studying it today. He's almost, think of an 8th-degree master black belt. He just had a technique. I even think now, if the modern day wrestlers would go back and study Doug Blubaugh's technique, they would improve their performance quite a bit. So I documented his technique in a series of booklets. And this is before video was really big and everything. This is the late 70s, early 80s. And we went around the country together, and I was the person he would demonstrate his moves on, and I was assistant coach for a couple of years. And we sold literally thousands of those books, thousands of them. And that turned me pretty much into a capitalist pig right on the spot. I mean, I wanted to know. I got interested.
How are we doing this? We can make money. Wow, look at that.
Yeah, and so I got interested. Well, tell me, I got interested in publishing, and I got interested in direct marketing. First I went to the school. I was at Indiana still. And I went to the business school because I didn't major in business, and I just couldn't find what I wanted on direct marketing. I couldn't, and publishing. I mean, the publishing was like the traditional. You go to New York and all that, but I wanted to self publish these booklets like I did with the coach. So I learned from myself on that, and that ended up after I left Indiana. That ended up, long story short, I got involved in this business, and it morphed into being an employee communications business, and then I did
Got it.
that for the next 35 years. So I come to this point in my
Okay.
life now. I retired. I sold that business in 2016 after operating it 35 years. And I had a great staff. In fact, a couple of them I've tapped to help me with this book. And the writing, I think the sales copywriting probably is an asset in fiction writing, because you got to hold people's interest and you got to try to hold the story together. You want them to keep turning the pages. We're terrible. We want to keep people up all night reading books, that kind of thing. So that's kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
the history. But I know you're a capitalist too. I heard the idea on one of your podcasts. Now there's about 45 billion in trust somewhere to handle our nuclear waste when we find a repository for it. And if I'm not mistaken, you thought you could do that for $20 million and pocket the rest. See, didn't you say that on one of your
It'd
podcasts?
be so easy.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I mean,
I'm thinking about this.
it's not far off, right?
So Ryan Pickering has the same idea, right? He goes, he tells NRC people that, hey, look at it. If you don't have a place to put it, you put it in my garage. And I'm thinking, well, after listening to you, I know why he made that offer. Now, and if Jay Leno made that offer, we could probably fit it all in there. Don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's fun. So, okay, so you had this publishing business. You discovered nuclear when you read Power to Save the World, The Truth About Nuclear Energy. Great book recommendation. So tell me about, I guess, after you sold the business, how did you get into nuclear and why did you want to write a novel about what kind of nuclear is the background and
You got
the
into nuclear
premise?
kind of, if you're getting on a highway on a ramp, you kind of slowly get on and escalate your speed. It wasn't a rocket launch for me from the days in Sandia. It was like I'd notice an article here and there and I'd read it, or I might be at the bookstore and I'd notice something, I'd pick it up. And then that type of activity started picking up. By the time I sold the business in 2016, I was paying a lot more attention. I think, I lived through 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, and I lived through Fukushima, and I remember all those things when they were happening. So by the time Fukushima happens, I realize they're not being accurate on TV with the news. They're scaring the heck out of everybody. And what they're saying about the radiation coming across the Pacific and things washing up on the west coast of the United States. And I remember telling my wife, that just can't be possible based on some of the stuff I read. And so that was kind of like,
Yeah.
all right, I escalated a little bit more there. And what about this waste? What about radiation? And, a lot of people that are in this community kind of went through these different phases. So by 2016, I'm selling the business. It's one of those things, I sold it faster than I anticipated. So I had nothing to do really quick. And I just started picking up more.
It's just like my biggest fear in the world. I tell you what, man, being bored, like, oh my God.
You're not going to be
And
in
then I
this
actually
business,
gotta,
though.
deal.
You're like what? Fire to Fission, right? Is the name of your
Yeah.
podcast? Yeah. So,
Yep.
okay. So the anti-nuclear technique now is, let's just say fusion's going to come out. We won't need fission. And in fact, this is probably going to happen in the next 2 weeks. And then I think, what's Mark going to do? He's kind of stuck. But I thought, no, you could just change your logo to fission to fusion. You're all set. You can keep going forever.
Yep.
or add an
I,
F,
I
and
think
you
that
go,
domain's already taken, so we'll have to
well,
buy it. But yeah,
maybe fire to fission to fusion and fun or something. I don't know.
perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something
Okay, so
like that.
sorry I cut you off, but you were I like the metaphor of an on ramp versus a rocket launch. So you were getting more and more engaged in it, and then you sold your business and
Yeah, and I
started
think,
writing.
yeah, who's it? Doctor, is it Dr. Keeler in Canada?
Kiefer, yeah.
He, yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of guy you throw him in the crib and he's saying, "Can we speed this process up? I got to go save the world." I just love that guy, listening to him and everything. And he said once that of all the things the great things he's done in his life, he felt like nuclear energy was the area where he could make the greatest contribution. And I thought, as I'm sitting here with you today, I think I'm in that space. I feel that way when I think about nuclear energy today. And some of the greatest people I've met in the last few years have been at these nuclear conferences, and it's a mission oriented community. It's they have they kind of have fiduciary to the public. They've got the public's best interest in mind over their own. I mean, it's just incredible. And so, but what got to be honest with you, being an athlete, what gets an athlete to get up at 5 in the morning before anybody knows who they are and before they've accomplished anything, and when they start training their butt off, what makes them do that? Because they're not famous at the point, right? So if you ask around, what really is the ignition on some of that thing is they just don't like somebody and they want to beat them. So in my case, when I was a kid, there was this guy, he beat me in wrestling. I don't know, sophomore, junior year in high school, and I just did not like him. And I was never going to let that happen again. And so Dan Gable had just won the Olympics in '72. I had a big poster of him on my bedroom wall, and it just took over. I just started working out 6, 7 hours a day, going at it, and every day I would think about how I wanted to beat the hell out of this guy. And so the year comes around, and I'm back on the mat with this guy, and well, I beat him pretty easily, but it was like I was beyond that at that point. Now I started thinking it'd be fun to win the state championship. It'd be fun to wrestle in college, and I got that kind of the thing that got me going kind of took me to a new direction. The same thing happened later in my life with nuclear energy. I just did not like the anti-nuclear people. They irked me. I like to say those imps irk me. So I wanted, but they were smart. I watched a speech by Ralph Nader once when I was at a conference, and I just wanted to throw my chair at him. But it just, how do you counter them? To me, they were smart, they were intelligent, they were well funded. If I'm going to take them on, I better know what I'm doing, and I better be able to think faster on my feet. So it was a training type of thing. I mean, I just started absorbing everything I could about nuclear. I studied the people that were good debaters at it, that kind of thing. And I've got a little acid test, I think, when I don't like somebody. I wonder what George Carlin would have said about it. Remember him, the comedian, George Carlin? So if you want, I go.
I don't.
Oh, okay. So George Carlin was this famous comedian, just ripped people apart, and his language was a little bit rich. So I wrote a little something down on what George Carlin might say about anti-nuclear people. So if you want to hear it, and I've taken all knowing we have
Yeah,
a
let's hear
family
it.
show.
Let's hear it.
Okay. So, and this isn't Mark Hinaman's opinion or Shawn Connors. This is what George Carlin probably would have thought if he had a choice. Anti-nuclear people are a snotty little sociopathic group of hyper-narcissistic, rich, pampered, Malthusian, putty-butt busybodies whose luxury, isolated lifestyle burn up Olympic-sized swimming pools full of fossil fuels while telling the poor little boys in sub-Saharan Africa and India to keep burning water buffalo dung to heat up your 200-calorie tin cup of dirty soup where your mothers and sisters spend all day cleaning clothes and fetching rancid water. We should seal these snobs up in Yucca Mountain, kind of a soft caramel filling instead of the hard English toffee we were going to put in there. That would give American taxpayers more than their money's worth for building that $19 billion political hellhole. The only way we'd let them out is they agree to debate Mark Nelson for an hour in the public square. That'll teach them. Nelson's like pro-nuclear Zorro. He'll have their buttons zipped off and their bangs trimmed before he goes in for the kill. I say, let's turn off their valves and switches for a week and see how they like it. I just don't like people that don't like people. So that's what I think George Carlin would say about anti-nuclear people. Now,
Shawn,
we don't want
we need to put you in charge of all public communications for a fire division, and written in the voice of George Carlin. Yeah.
Yeah. And you ought to watch some of his videos. You'll see how this ties in. So, but it's kind of negative. You and I would have never said that. George Carlin would have said that. So we wouldn't have said something like that. We're more positive. So I have also something that there's a guy named Don Ardell who was a wellness guru back in the 90s. He was like a triathlete and a hippie, and he was just a colorful character. I just love the guy. So what he would say about wellness, I'm going to paraphrase it for pro-nuclear energy advocates. So you ready for this? Pro-nuclear energy. Ready? Here we go. Pro-nuclear energy advocates are fun, romantic, hip, sexy, and free. People that advocate for nuclear energy are better looking, have higher morale, superior bowel movements, and more antibodies against disease. They also become wildly popular, tax exempt, and get elected to office. And they get assigned to nuclear regulatory bodies that approve the construction of big, huge nuclear plants by the dozens and 10,000 small modular reactors at a time. And everybody, everywhere, loves them for it. So I think that's what Don Ardell would have said about pro-nuclear people.
So I love it. That's great.
So I just love this nuclear energy space, and it's can do good for the world. And I think in every conference you go to, or when you talk to the advocacy community, it seems like the advocacy community and the nuclear industry community are kind of melding. They seem like two separate things for a while, but they say it's not the technology, it's the communication. And I think you've got such a good story, but you haven't told it. This documentary Nuclear Now by Oliver Stone just came out. That was pretty good. But we're kind of pounding we're kind of putting the technology in front of people all the time. We're arguing about how it's safe and it's dense. It doesn't need to be refueled. It powers a lot of stuff. All that stuff is true, but what do you want when you go into a hardware store? If you go, so let's say you need a drill, right? And you're going to go in a hardware store. You really don't want the drill. You want the hole, right? And we just seem like we're always selling the drill. We got to sell the hole. And I thought, what could my contribution be in this world in nuclear energy? And it's almost like I wish I would have got at this sooner. I wish I would have discovered nuclear energy sooner, and maybe my career would have been more tied to it. But I thought, no, I'm coming at it from a different place, and my whole life, my whole career has prepared me for it, for this moment. I go to a nuclear conference now, and I sit around a table with all these wonderful people, scientists, engineers, suppliers, graduate students, and I say, well, what do you do? And I say, I'm a fiction author. And it just changes the chemistry. Right away they're interested, and I tell them, I tell you, I tell everybody, the good guys are about to tell their story. This is the first time there's ever been a positive story in popular culture about nuclear energy. We got more heroes in nuclear energy than we did in our space program. They're in fossil fuels too. I know you're from the fossil fuel world, and I like the fire to fission. In all seriousness, we should allow everybody in Africa, India, whatever, burn the next most dense fuel you have available. I don't care what it is. Get off the straw
Yep.
and go to the oil. Use diesel if you got it. Use natural gas if you've got it. Get them moving right down that density line. And if you study energy for any amount of time, that's the way to go. So, like here in Michigan, and I'm kind of anti-wind. I'm more supportive of solar. I think solar on top of what it's powering without touching the grid is a good thing. I mean, if I can put solar panels on my roof and power my water heater and some of my refrigerator, that's not a bad thing. I don't want to go, but don't let it go out in the grid and screw everything up. Just keep it right where it's at.
Yeah.
Wind is going to be probably the biggest debacle of our century, I think. I just do not understand it. And I'm a little bit more, when you go to these nuclear conferences, first of all, I'm retired. I'm not from the industry, so I can say anything I want. But when you go to the nuclear conferences, there's always this huge elephant in the room. We need all of the above. Well, wait a minute. What do you want? Why do you want to put in a monster dam in Africa? It's going to disrupt all the wildlife migration. It's going to go litter those savannas. I mean, why don't you use like a combined natural gas plant, or start using small modular reactors and leave the animals alone and maintain the beauty of that country? And
Yeah.
I think the people in Africa, and you say, well, why don't they use it now? Some people in your audience will probably know this, but the banks that loan money to Africa for development prescribe how that money's spent, so they're unable to leverage, as we have been able to throughout our history, access to fossil fuel development. And there's more natural gas off the coast of Africa. We could power the world probably for another 150 years. It seems like the more natural gas they find, the more natural gas they find. And so I'd
It's
like to
true.
see
Yeah.
the developing countries be allowed to move down the density path as fast as possible. And that could be fire, fission, fusion. I think wind and solar are kind of an ancillary thing, kind of a side dish.
So, Shawn, I like your approach. You've immersed yourself in this industry and met a lot of characters and real life characters, and then identified a niche where you thought you could contribute, right? So, let's
Yeah.
circle back to your book. I mean, it sounds like that motivated you to write a book and bring to light some of the realities that exist in the real world through your skill set of storytelling and writing, and you did that with your novel Chain Reaction, right?
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit more about. I mean, I know you covered it a little bit already, but kind of what was your inspiration for this book? Who's the protagonist? Why was she a hero? And what were you trying to accomplish with it? And not without giving spoiler alerts to people, but
Okay.
yeah,
Well,
sell us on
okay.
it.
So in the book, I talk about the power of women, and we're going to launch this on Marie Curie's birthday, November 7th. The book uses a woman protagonist. So Amy Austin is the 19-year-old science polymath in the book. And the book opens when she's 19, about to turn 20. And in the first early drafts of the book, we had her as a little girl, and we had Frank Austin, her father, as a protagonist. But after going through different reviews, we switched that, and we made Amy the protagonist at age 19. And we decided, let's surround her with strong women. Now, remember, you're the dog in, let's say, in the best friend's rescue kennel. And that's how the men and the women kind of operate in this story. The women there's powerful men in this story, and they cooperate, and they're engaged in the story the whole way. But if you really read the story closely, it's the women that are leading the action and making things happen. So it all starts with Amy Austin, who probably at a young age, her parents realized she was special. She has an aunt, and Jolene Grassley, who ends up becoming the mayor of the small town they're in. Jolene Grassley is married to Stu Grassley, former Navy guy. I thought you guys would like that. He moves to Algonquin, Michigan, which is a fictional town. And between Jolene Grassley and Stu Grassley, who are kind of a adopted uncle and aunt. And Becky Austin and Frank Austin, who are Amy Austin's parents, they probably from her beginning they put a protective shell around her. Like Jolene Grassley's a heavyweight political street fighter. She probably could have gone somewhere, but she decides to stay in Algonquin, becomes mayor of the town, and they're trying to save the local nuclear plant, which we call the Rock, uh, the in Story. And that's kind of like so we've got the small town set up with a small nuclear plant. That's similar to what's going on here in South Haven with this Palisades, which is an 800 megawatt nuclear plant currently shut down. So we modeled after Palisades, and so we have them in this plant. So now this was about 2020 or so. Eric Meyer from Generation Atomic had got his team together, and they sent out. This is true now. I guess I got to tell you, I'm moving from fiction to.
Yeah.
So I felt, I thought the story needed to be told in fiction. Fiction has done a good job of attacking nuclear or diminishing it. So,
Yeah, it's always the bad guy, right?
yeah,
Even, I mean, Top Gun, right? There's an enrichment facility that was the
yeah,
target that they were going after, right? In Top Gun Maverick, and then it's always, oh man, the nuclear power plant's going to get blown. But there is one in Cloud Atlas. The
okay.
oil companies blow up
Oh,
nuclear power plants, and then it ends up in this dystopian sort of view that that's kind of a fun one for me to
maybe my critical
dive
thinking
into. But
started back in when was it, the 70s when China Syndrome came out. And
yeah,
the big line in that movie is the reactor will burn through the core of the earth and come out on the other. And I said, well, wait a minute, isn't the core of the earth like molten? And this is before
it's already nuclear. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, well, that didn't make any sense. Right there, it's like, oh, something's wrong with the story. But I felt like it's time for the good guys to tell their story. That's kind of what my mantra is. So if you look at science, NASA's got astronauts. I mean, the Manhattan Project has some names. We just saw Oppenheimer, but again, that's kind of tied to nuclear weapons. It's not a completely positive message about peaceful nuclear energy. So I thought, what we really need is a story that has a protagonist that the public can relate to. They don't need to know about nuclear energy. They need to know about what this young woman wants to do at this point in history when she looks at her life as a gifted person and realizes she can make a difference. What path is she going to take, and what kind of help is she going to need? And she's going to be one of these people that do start a chain reaction and change the world. I mean, those people do exist. So it was about this time I went back and got my editor, Jen Cronin, who we worked together in the past, and now she's been very helpful on this project. And she has a lot of experience in the healthcare sector and in the energy sector as a writer and editor. And she has some kids, a wonderful family and young kids, and she wants a better world for them. So we went spent a lot of time on this. Now we wrote a 500-page novel and threw it away and started over. And it was about this time we were agonizing over, because it was a good novel, but it was like we wanted this chance for this novel to be a movie. So we were talking to script writers on how would you like a book written if you were going to turn it into a movie, and that's before we even started writing the book. So we were going down that, we were anticipating success, but it was hard to get that product where it needed to be. And then I was going to tell you earlier, Eric Meyer surfaces with this idea of writing the Sierra Club and asking them to reconsider going pro-nuclear like they were in the beginning of their existence. And a lot of people signed that letter, including a lot of people that are members of the Sierra Club. And basically they responded, pound sand. It was like no way they were going to do this, and they doubled down on it. And then that was kind of the end of that. And I always admired those guys for doing that. I thought, that's a ballsy thing. That's kind of cool. I mean, go right at
I
them.
mean,
I
the
mean,
Sierra Club
I go,
for doubling down on their misguided morals, but
yeah. So, incidentally, this is a whole different topic, but if you're a pro-nuclear advocate, go after anti-nuclear people. Find them. don't sit back and wait to hear about it. Search the internet and find out who's writing editorials, who's in front of the NRC, and go challenge them. Don't let them say the things that they're saying because they're not true. A lot of the things they say aren't true. So anyway, I thought, okay, what if Generation Atomic sent that letter to Sierra Club and something different happened? What if they were in Little South Haven here and Palisades was going to change their reactor to a MOX reactor, the first one in the United States since the Carter administration? The very technology that was invented here that France adopted, and now they recycle their nuclear fuel. What if we went back and started doing it here in the United States? And we were going to start it right here, but we needed a license extension on this plant. I would think the anti-nuclear community would be very aggressive about making sure they didn't get that license extension because they don't want the other 92 reactors in the United States switching over to MOX fuel either. So they have a movie star that's on their board, and because his grandmother actually founded it's called TESS, Terrestrial Ecology Society, had founded it. So they offered to send their Academy Award-winning movie star to Little Algonquin, Michigan, to debate anybody that the Atomic Garage movement wants to put up against them. And they put Amy up against this guy. And that kind of starts the dynamic tension in the story. And all my antagonists, I try to give the reader more dimension to more than a single dimension to them. You're going to understand why they are against nuclear energy. I'm going to try and put you inside their head. I've been inside it a little bit, and I want you to know why somebody advocates that way. So I build in their backgrounds and I build in their passions. And in Josh Manning's case, he's the actor. His mother's kind of his grandmother was kind of a Rachel Carson character. And I'm a big fan of Rachel Carson in the 60s. If you ever go back and read her work, it's some of the most fabulous writing on nature that's ever been written. She's been a little bit picked on because she was against DDT in the 60s, but if you really read what she was saying, she just thought there was more testing needed to be done and that they were overdosing the environment with it, which all turned out to be true. But she died of cancer as her book was published. Silent Spring was the name of the book. And she died of cancer, so she wasn't really able to defend herself or defend her book. But she did talk about some of the waste coming out of our test facilities from nuclear plants, which were dedicated at the time to weaponry. And she had a legitimate point about that waste being discharged into the rivers. And as a result, I think the anti-nuclear movement kind of was born with Rachel Carson. And had we listened to her then, or had she lived possibly, maybe that whole discussion would have gone down a different path. It's one of those things. We look at history, things turn on a dime. And I always wonder what would our world be like today if Rachel Carson had lived and been able to defend her book, because it had a dramatic impact on nuclear energy. And then in the 60s it just exploded. There's talk even in the oil world. They say that the big oil companies really were anti-nuclear because they didn't want the nuclear fuel to displace the fossil fuel. And, my research says that, some of that's true, but like everything in reality, it's more nuanced than that. I mean, it has a little bit to do with property and mineral rights. The mineral rights for natural gas and everything are below private property owners, and they can benefit from that. But if back in the day, if the government would have taken control of nuclear fuel and fossil fuels started phasing out in the 60s, the government would have been in control of all energy today because of that. There wouldn't have been property rights. They're not going to let you. There's not as much uranium as there is natural gas under the earth, and they're not going to let property rights extend to nuclear fuel. So there were a whole bunch of things. So even if there's a fossil fuel community, a natural gas consortium that is in this story, and you would think they're going to be the bad guys, but it's nuanced. So I'm going to let you inside their world a little bit, and you're going to see what the world looks like from the perspective of natural gas producers in the story as well. And so we have this this everybody's kind of, you've got natural gas, you've got the anti-nuclear NGO community, you've got the pro-nuclear community, and Amy's going to come up with this nuclear reactor because her father's able to invent a fictional alloy called sartorium, and they're able to jump the technology 20 years. And really, the story's about what would happen if that actually happened. It's been done before. I mean, you could argue Edison did that with electrical distribution. You know, I had been part of a team that we rebuilt stock ticker tape machines from the 1870s, and they had to distribute that energy to those mechanical devices. And if one of those mechanical devices failed, the next one had to be able to continue to work. So you had to build your grid so that all the stock tickers on the network would work, even if one failed. And it is from that work that Edison developed his dynamo and then figured out how to distribute DC electricity. So I think the light bulb was almost simultaneously invented by another inventor in France, but it was Edison's power generation and power distribution that made that unique. And he probably jumped the technology 10 or 20 years when he did that. The same thing with the Wright brothers. The wind tunnels were in use, but the Wright brothers really saw the potential of using wind tunnels in testing. And they quickly figured out thousands of ways their wing would not work. And by the time they had achieved flight, they probably jumped that technology 20 years. So this has happened in history several times where you have incremental improvements, and then all of a sudden you've got this giant leap. So that goes on.
Yeah.
And as far as the reactor goes, I was referred to a guy named Jeremy Smith. He's working on his PhD degree at University of Florida, and he volunteered to help be our technical advisor on the book. And his charge was, we want our readers to make a short leap. We want it to go from fiction to reality, and we gotta ask them to suspend reality, but we don't want to ask them to put too much energy into that. So he just grabbed onto this project, and he's been a blast to work with. So at the end, Amy's going to explain how the reactor works in about a 500-word or 600-word excerpt of a speech that she gives. So everybody in your community, in the nuclear community, will be able to read how the actual nuclear reactor works with this fictional alloy in it. And so it's kind of cool. I think, you're going to say, hey, man, this might be possible. Fun. Yeah. And the other thing Jeremy helped us with is...
We just need the alloy.
Yep, the alloy made it possible. So, and we needed the alloy to make it possible. And then the other thing that happened is Emrod is a real company in Australia. We use Copenhagen Atomics in our story. Whenever we use real organizations like that, we ask for their permission to be included in the book. So we sent our manuscript to Emrod when we were ready, and they were thrilled. They said, "Oh yeah, you can use our name in the book." So Emrod transmits power through the atmosphere. And before we talked to them, we were just on their website. We were studying some of the work they do in that field, Stanford, and just brainstorming. And I ended up really just kind of imagining how it would work. And Jeremy wasn't with us at the time. So I don't know if you hear there's a cigarette boat behind us firing up, burning all kinds of fossil fuel across the river from where I'm sitting. But so Jeremy wasn't with us at the time. Emrod got back to us and said, we're thrilled you're going to use our name in the story. We like the fictional characters you built around our company, but you've really underestimated our technology. And so I was making it all up. I mean, I was hoping they could do someday what we had in the story, and it turns out we actually undershot what they were doing now. So we geared that back up. And I told Jeremy, I said, we got to up our game in this atmospheric transmission thing. This is like a real deal. They're doing this stuff. So he said, let me look into it. And he studied how it worked, and we rewrote that whole section of the story. And I'm actually thinking one of the greatest things that come out of the story is more of awareness of that technology, because our grid is a mess. And if there is a technology out there where we can do atmospheric transition in the near future, I think it's going to be pretty cool.
I guess I'm totally unfamiliar with it. What is this? Emerald? I'm Googling it now. Unleashing power
EM,
beaming technology today.
yeah,
Power anywhere.
EMROD. They're in New
Wow.
Zealand. And they've been doing this for a while. They've got an
Wow.
interesting
This
story.
is
They got a dynamic leader, you know. And so we needed
cool.
that
I'll check them
technology in
out.
our book.
That's really
Yeah.
cool.
The only thing we really made up in the book that, I mean, from a technological standpoint, when you read it, is we made up Sartorium. And little bit of a sad, happy story, but my friend Anthony Sartor, University of Michigan grad, PhD, and he was my neighbor in Florida. We actually live in Florida, and we come back to our original home in Michigan for a couple of years of the summer. And Tony was an engineer by training, and it was the very first time I had this idea. It was just like, I'm thinking maybe I'll write a fiction book about nuclear energy. And he was all in, and he couldn't stop talking about it. You need to read this, you need to read that. Come on, get writing, do it. And I don't think if it was for him, I would have really started digging into it as much as I did. But at every step, he gave me enthusiasm and support and notes and all kinds of. Then we go to lunch and talk endlessly about it. It was kind of fun, but we hadn't even really. It was very in the beginning. Well, during the project, Tony died unexpectedly. So he's a little bit older than I am, but it was a surprise. We didn't think we were going to lose him. So I dedicated the book to Tony Sartor, and then I named the fictional alloy after Tony, and we call it Sartorium, and that's where that comes from. And Tony's responsible for some of the properties that we built into that concept, and it's just kind of a sad, happy story. I think, I wish he was here to see us
Yeah.
launch the book. So I think he will be, though.
Me too. Well, Shawn, I that's fantastic. I'm excited for people to read this novel. I think it's an excellent piece of work and project that you've put into trying to humanize this industry and this technology and tell the story even through fiction, but actually make it a hero, right? Like
Yeah.
leverage it from a side that hasn't been popular before. So before we run out of time, I want to touch on the atomic garage movement also. So
Okay.
and your guys' book, The Quick Road to Nuclear. What is this? Why'd you get it started? And yeah, give us a little bit of background and how can people find it?
Okay. The world has a lot of good nuclear advocacy groups in it. So when we started, this is a publishing platform basically. So I'm from the publishing world. So the Atomic Garage movement is actually the name of this movement in the fictional story. So it's a way, because nuclear reactors in the story will fall so much in price that they'll be within the range of small business and groups all over the world. They'll be able to manufacture them from scratch for about $10 million per copy. The only thing they won't be able to get a hold of is the fuel. And the story shows you how we overcome that problem. That was a huge thing to overcome in conceptualizing. But I think at the end of the day, you're going to finish the story and say, gosh, this is really possible. If there could be sanctioned nuclear reactors being of this quality and expense being put in all over the world, but there might be some unsanctioned ones too. Scientists may form small groups and power different parts of the world without anybody's permission. And how could that be done? And so that was part of so the Atomic Garage movement is really people that have decided they want to adopt this technology all over the world. And then we named our company the Atomic Garage Movement as well in real life. And the Atomic Garage Movement is going to be a fictional extension of these stories. So when you go we're going to evolve into that. So when you go, you're going to see the characters working in the Atomic Garage. You're going to see they might have podcasts, they might have classes, there'll be simulations and videos. For instance, in the book, there's a song that a lady who's a lyricist writes, and we might go to Nashville and try to find somebody to help us. Actually, we've got the words of the song. We might go and try to find somebody to help us write the music to the song. Maybe that'll become the theme song for the book. So it's going to be this artistic.
I'll help you, Shawn.
Okay, I just heard you on
Put
the
a little piano
piano.
music to it.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at Grace Stanky on the violin and you on the piano, and I think that's appropriate, don't you?
Perfect.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark Nelson plays too. We'll get him to contribute a little bit.
Oh, okay, that's great. I just met him. I've known of him, and I just met him for the first time when I was in London. So
Yep.
yeah, he's a good guy. Felt like he was a celebrity to me. So
Well, so I mean, this pamphlet that you guys put together is excellent, right? It's your quick road to nuclear energy. I mean, I went through it.
yeah,
It's
the
not a
quick,
quick read necessarily. I mean, it's still like 50 pages, but I mean, big text, lots of pictures. You can get through it in half an hour
yeah.
to an hour if you just
So yeah, it's a
yeah.
nonfiction accompaniment to the fiction book, and it's posted on our website now. It's a free PDF download, and we'll work with anybody in the country who wants to adapt it for nuclear advocacy work. It, it it's organized into 21 questions that Jen and I decided we had to answer for ourselves, because as we started writing this book, the first thing you run into is it's for somebody that isn't grown up in this industry, like, and gone to the school and all the training. At first, not later, but at first, it's a hard nut to crack. I mean, it's hard to understand everything going on. It's hard to really grasp what the issues are. So we sat down and we wrote down 21 questions we wanted the answer to, and we wanted detailed answers. And we thought if we do that exercise, we're going to be able to write this book a lot better, because we'll have the foundation to write the book if we know the answers to these questions. And so we started writing down the questions and writing down the answers. And we ended up actually putting down the fiction project for a while, because we thought this is important enough that we've got to focus on this until we get it done. And so that's what we did. And so now that booklet kind of is really what trained Jen and I to be able to put together the fiction novel. But it's got almost any, if you don't know much about nuclear energy or you want to learn more about it, it's got probably every question you would, somebody not in the industry would probably want to ask.
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent resource that could be distributed to advocates and organizations that are trying to educate people or trying to educate public officials. Like, yeah, it was very consumable. I'll say thorough, and will be really, really helpful. So, and you guys make it available, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's
it's a
free.
link on
It's
your website,
part of our
and
advocacy.
anyone can access it and distribute it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The more the merrier. Spread it all over the world.
Yeah. No, it was really good. So we'll post a link to it. Well, Shawn, I'm excited. I have to admit, I didn't get a chance to finish the manuscript that you had sent me, but I'm excited to do that and excited for kind of your book to go live. Hopefully, we'll be releasing this close to you guys' Kindle live date. You said it's available on Amazon now or available for pre-order?
Yeah, the Kindle version is available for pre-order. We're working out the print and audio are going to be on it. We have multiple narrators in the audio. We're probably going to translate it to Spanish, hopefully on day one, because there's a lot of people, at least in North America, that are speaking Spanish, and probably other languages, but we're going to wait and see where it becomes popular. And we're starting to turn the corner and thinking about book 2 already. I think a lot of that story is going to take place in Africa, and we're starting to reach out to the nuclear energy community in Africa and the energy community in Africa to understand what their issues are a little better, and try to figure out what the future world's going to look like or could possibly look like with Amy Austin in it. So we'll see how that goes.
I like it. Well, Shawn, I guess pivoting back to the real world, leave us on a vision of hope, how and positive, optimistic version of the future. What's it look like to you? What's the next 10, 20 years look like, and how do we get there?
Well, let me start by saying, I've been around a little while now, and my life experience and all the reading I've done, usually the optimists are correct. We live in a pessimistic day-to-day world, but over the long term, the optimists have usually proved to be correct. And their achievements almost go unrecognized. You have to study to understand what humanity has been able to accomplish since the industrial age. I don't think we should be anti-fossil fuels. I think we should put those dense energies where they're needed. I think the best hope for the future are the women in the world, where we can bring them into the community as contributors to technology and policy and innovation. And I don't say that at the neglect of, say, little boys or young men. I just think bringing more women in at higher levels is going to help all of humanity. And that may not happen if we can get electrical power to them, but it will never happen if we don't. So the first job of being a humanist, where you believe that people are good, and the more you empower them and the more they reach their potential, the better the world's going to be, including the earth and including the wildlife and everything we all say we have in common. You've got to get energy to the women. And I mean, if there's a galactic guardian out there that's looking at the gate, he's saying they're still too hostile, they're still too oppressive. They're corrupt. They've just got too far to go to let them in our community. I think the first step to getting past that gatekeeper is we have to free up the women, and we'll unleash 100% more talent than is out there right now. And I personally believe more energy in the world, more women in higher positions, the less chance there is of violent conflict at every level. So I think if you're dedicating your life to making sure that we can produce clean, reliable, 24/7 affordable energy to everybody. In other words, if you're sitting in the United States like I am right now, why can't the rest of the world have the same energy I have available to me? I don't want to reduce myself to having less energy. I want the person that doesn't have any to have what I have. And technologically, there really is no reason that can't happen right now. So I think let's keep pushing the benefits of nuclear energy and dense fuels, and get those in places where they're needed. And I think our children and our grandchildren are going to have a better, less violent, and more productive world than we had. They can up the game after us, I think, if we do that now.
I love that, Shawn. That's such an optimistic view of the future, and I particularly love your empowerment of women and admiration. I 100%, 1,000% agree. I know so many women that are so much smarter and better at life than me. So
Yeah, yeah.
definitely more than I know of men. So
I can tell
yeah,
you for sure.
that's
Like,
excellent.
I've been married 41 years, and I can almost say that she saved me, because I think without her I might have been president of the United States now, and that would have been terrible. So anyway, she kept me. She she gave me a good life and helped me make right decisions, and I like the space I'm in.
Love it. Shawn Connors, thanks so much. This has been absolutely wonderful to chat with you.
Yep. Thank you, Mark. We'll talk to you soon.